Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. It's nice to hear, as my voice is still waking up, it's nice to hear the cacophony of your voices energized on this Saturday morning. We have a wonderful day planned, and we're so glad you're here. And it is only fitting that we start with prayer this morning. So I'm going to invite up Andrea Hugg and Judge Tom Donnelly and Deacon Tim Hayden to pray.
Good morning. There's a few instructions with our prayer this morning, and I'd like to run through them real quick with you before we step into that prayer. So each of us will lead a section of that prayer, and we will speak from the voice of the victim, the offender of a crime, and a community. When we introduce each one, we will say, "My name is." So we'll say, "I am the victim. My name is." And we invite you to pause. We'll pause and invite you to name someone that you may know that you will lift up in prayer this morning. So that's the first one. There's actually 4 things that you're going to need to know. So you can say that name in full voice or in the quiet of your heart, and know that this moment, this prayer is meant for them. We'll ask you in our prayer 3 times, "Will you help?" And if you are so moved, if this is something that you are willing through your prayer, through your action, through your way of speaking, please stand in solidarity and stand with your arms open as a pledge to be in solidarity with those who you have just mentioned. We will say, God of healing, God of justice, and God of redemption. And when we say those things, it will be 3 separate times. God of healing once, okay. Please respond, "Hear our prayer." We will end with the Glory Be and the Hail Mary and invite you to pray those prayers with us. So again, my name is, and you may speak the name aloud or in the quiet of your heart. Will you help me? Stand in solidarity if that's something you're willing to do. And God of healing, God of justice, God of redemption, hear our prayer. We offer this prayer from our own experiences, and we hope that it will resonate with your experiences and those with whom you work and those who you love. As we begin, we take a moment to remember, first and foremost, that God is with us, that God abides in us, that God names each of us, loves each of us, gives each of us dignity. God calls us beloved.
When a pebble is dropped in the water, it makes ripples across the surface. When we engage in this work, we are like the expanding ripples, reaching further and further. like the water, we expand in strength, expand in the circumference of our reach. Our outreach expands, resulting in conversion and transformation, until ultimately we expand too. We expand our vision of healing, of justice, of redemption. Not only do we shape one another by our actions, we are linked inextricably to each other in our healing. As we are healed, the world is healed. As we are transformed, the world is transformed. And as we are redeemed, the world is redeemed. One healing step ripples into another until the world is healed.
A reading from the Holy Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 35 through 38. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. And as he watched Jesus walk by, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard what he said and followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following him and said to them, "What are you looking for?"
I am the one you harmed. Some call me victim. My name is Mary, Kathy, Carol. I prefer survivor.
Jesus asks, "What are you looking for?"
I have a voice. I need to speak. Will you help me? Empower me. Give me courage. Give me a place to tell my story. Listen to me. Listen to my pain. Help me trust the process. Invite me to healing. God of healing, hear our prayer.
I did this. Some call me perpetrator. My name is
Jesus asks, "What are you looking for?"
I've no right to ask you to listen to my unhealed trauma. But if you would, I could heal. I can take responsibility for what I've done. I need to admit aloud what I've done. I cannot carry it alone anymore. Will you help me? Hold me accountable. Hear the hard truths and challenge me to live with integrity. I want to do better. Give me hope. I can be different. I can be better. God of justice, hear our prayer.
We are the community. We are the city called, and you mentioned your city, Chicago.
Minneapolis.
We are tired of the suffering, tired of the never-ending cycles of violence and incarceration again.
Jesus asks, "What are you looking for?"
We want to do better. We need to make hard choices, choices that take longer, choices that go to the heart of the matter, choices that surface the pain, choices that cost us, choices that require that we sacrifice, and choices that allow truth to be seen in the light. Will you help? Stand up for the long haul. Stand together. Stick with it. And it will take time, a long time. We must remain in solidarity with those who have experienced harm. We must stand with those responsible for the harm and extend hope. We must work together to change systems that perpetuate harm and instead allow each person's dignity to be known. We must journey together to transform our world into the kingdom of God. God, who is redemption, hear our prayer.
A pebble is dropped into the water. The ripple expands further and further, expanding in consequence, expanding in influence, expanding in potential for transformation. So too can we expand our vision of healing, of justice, of redemption. Because not only do we impact one another by our actions, we are connected to each other in our healing. We are responsible to one another for our transformation. And as we are transformed, the world the world is transformed. One step into healing ripples into another until the world embraces and extends compassion, until the world is redeemed and the kingdom of God is now. May it be so. May it be so to the glory of the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
As we continue in our journey of restoring justice, that right relationship with God and that right relationship with one another, we're going to need help. We need help from one another, and we're going to need help from the intercession of the saints. As we are in this year, this month of Our Lady of the Rosary, we can end our prayer by turning to her, asking for her intercession to lead us closer to her Son in our work of restoring justice. I ask you to join with me. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. All angels and saints, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you all. Continuing in this spirit of prayer, we'd like to share with you a short video.
What I would call my moment of awakening happened 9 years into my incarceration. What is this all going to mean when I'm gone? Is anyone even going to remember me? How did I get here? How did I get from being a straight A student in elementary school, deemed gifted, to sitting in the furthest place from freedom a human being could be? I started to think about a relationship with God. I ended up going to Mass and receiving communion for the first time since I was going to church with Mom. I started to feel grounded again. I quickly became engulfed in church activity. I had enrolled in a bachelor's degree program through Villanova. I was learning about restorative justice through a photo essay book of people who've been victimized, for the most part, parents of murdered children. And I remember realizing that I, Felix Rosado, caused a family the same kind of pain I was reading about. And it's something that I didn't think about much prior to that afternoon. Restorative justice is a way of doing justice that seeks to heal harm by involving those directly impacted by it, including those who caused it. In restorative justice, you have to sit across the person you hurt and listen to them talk about that impact in as much detail as they can. And I truly believe that when people do come face to face with the true consequences of their actions, that they're less likely to commit them again. It's really a gospel way of doing justice. I learned that it's something that the Catholic Church supports and advocates for. And I remember thinking, wow, this is perfect. God brought me to my brother Charles Boyd, who was also passionate about restorative justice. We developed a workshop to introduce other people to this way of life. And people were hunting us down in the hallways and in the yard, saying, here, sign me up. All the glory goes to God. Every day when I go to work and I come off the trolley and emerge from underground onto Market Street, and I feel the air and the light, it hits me that I'm free. Every day I get to go to work and talk to my younger self. To bring young people together with people that they hurt, to talk about what happened and to develop a plan for what the young person needs to do to put things more right. Restorative justice centers human dignity.
I'd like to invite the panel to come up while I'm introducing. Elevating the voices of those who have been directly impacted by the criminal legal system is a key component of Catholic Mobilizing Network's mission. Whether one has caused or suffered harm, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. This is an essential first step in transforming the criminal legal system from punitive to restorative. My name is Chris Ann Valancourt Murphy, and I serve as the Executive Director of Catholic Mobilizing Network, if we haven't already yet met. I serve with joy and humility in this enormous mission. I'm greeting all of you here in the atrium at the University of St. Thomas Law School and all those who are joining us virtually today. Thank you for being here. Whether you've been here over the last 2 days or you're joining us just for the first time this morning, we are glad you are here for day 3 of Journeying Toward Restoration. We have yet another extraordinary panel moderated by Mark Osler from UST's Law School for this morning. And the day ahead today is followed by 6 breakout sessions to choose from, lunch, a closing synodal participatory process, and other wonderful things this afternoon. We thank Ascension for generously sponsoring this morning's panel. And we are committed to creating an environment at this conference that is trauma-informed. We know that restorative justice is about the work of repairing and healing from harm, which necessarily involves naming harm. In this plenary, A Transformed Criminal Legal System, we will hear mentions of violent crime. If strong emotions arise, please be attentive to your body, to your emotions and needs. Feel free to move about, get a drink, maybe step away as needed. And a reminder that on the second floor of the building, toward the far end of the hallway, there's a peaceful, small, reflective room that's available for you if you need a quiet space. There you'll find instructions if you do need some individualized support for who to contact. And then if you're joining us virtually, please keep a watch out for the chat for instructions, again, if you need to to find yourself with some assistance. Again, a focus this morning is the plenary, a transformed criminal legal system. We know that the criminal legal system is deeply broken. We prayed about it. We saw, mentions of it. And we know that we need to break the cycles of violence and respond to harm in ways that promote accountability, hope, and healing. We are blessed to have this extraordinary panel of speakers with us who work alongside, inside, and outside the legal system to advance reform and transformation that honors the dignity of people impacted by crime and incarceration. Mark Osler will facilitate the discussion. Professor Osler is the Robert and Marion Short Distinguished Chair of Law here at the University of St. Thomas Law School, but he's currently on leave because he's serving as the Director of the Criminal Division and Deputy Hennepin County Attorney. He works to advocate for sentencing and clemency policies rooted in the principles of human dignity. His clemency law clinics have resulted in over 100 people having been freed from prison. He has been named the Professor of the Year, and he's consistently awarded Outstanding Scholarship and Outstanding Teaching Awards. He's a former federal prosecutor and played a key role in striking down the mandatory 100-to-1 ratio between crack and powder cocaine in the federal sentencing guidelines by winning a case in the U.S. Supreme Court. And working directly on the death penalty as I do, I don't want to leave out that Mark has two compelling books about death row, Jesus on Death Row and Prosecuting Jesus. We're so glad that you will facilitate the discussion, Mark. To my right is Sister Janet Ryan. She is a Franciscan sister of Clinton, Iowa, and is originally from Boston. She's been ministering at Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation since 2014. She assists adults in earning their high school diploma, offers peace circles in the community, and circle trainings at PBMR, and recently inside Illinois state prisons. Janet has a communications degree from UConn, a master's in pastoral ministry, and she's passionate about living and promoting active nonviolence and restorative justice. Welcome, Sister Janet. John Choi is the Ramsey County Attorney. John was sworn in as the first Korean American chief prosecutor in the country in 2011. Since taking office, he has become a state and national leader in progressive justice reform, working with public officials and impacted communities to reimagine justice and the role of prosecutors. John's innovative approach to working collaboratively with system and community partners has transformed the way government responds to domestic violence, sex trafficking, sex assaults in Minnesota, and has improved support for victims and survivors. Thank you, John. Next is Aswad Thomas, who is the current Vice President on the Alliance for Safety and Justice and the National Director Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice. He's the author of a book entitled The Stars Represent You and Me. As an African-American male and a surviving victim of violence, Aswad is well aware of the impacts of trauma and loss in the many communities across the country that have experienced and continue to live with loss. Aswad is a victim of gun violence. 2 near-fatal gunshots in his back not only ended his basketball career, but nearly ended his life. Driven by this traumatic experience and his passion for helping others learn to deal with their own trauma, Aswad has dedicated his life to organizing communities, helping to elevate the voices of those victims and their families through both state and federal policymaking debates. And finally, Leonard Rubio is the executive director of Insight Prison Project. He spent over 23 years incarcerated with California's jail and prison system for a 15-year life sentence for second-degree murder. While incarcerated at San Quentin, Leonard created the Responsibility, Rehabilitation, and Restoration Interfaith Roundtable to promote restorative justice by including prisoners and volunteers from many faith and ethnic backgrounds to work together. Leonard participated in numerous IPP programs as a participant and then a co-facilitator for victim offender education groups, Next Steps, the Violence Prevention Program Facilitator Training, and many others. Join me in welcoming Mark and our wonderful panelists.
All right, thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be back in this beautiful place that I love. I've been gone for a couple months with my new job. And in this new job, I remember being a very young prosecutor, well, not that young, but a new prosecutor, my first trial, felony trial in Detroit in federal court. I worked hard to prepare for it, get my witnesses ready, make sure my arguments were strong, have a closing that would move people to convict, and they did. And when they came back with that guilty verdict, I expected to feel happy, but I didn't. I was overwhelmed with sadness as they took the man away. And I had this sense, almost, it was more like a memory than anything else, of the story of John 8, where the crowd had gathered to stone the woman. And when we read that story, very often people put themselves in the place of Jesus, that it's our place to tell people, go and sin no more. But I realized I was the person with the stone. And that's a heavy weight. And that sense of tragedy that goes with that imbues this whole field. It's something where people need deep resources to do it well for a long time. But it's also an area in which there can be profound grace and mercy and recognition of human dignity. Doing the clemency work, one of the things that I've come across is once in a while I'm lucky enough to go to the home of one of the people who received clemency through the work of my students. And when I do, almost always, if it's someone who was released by President Obama, I find the same thing on the wall of their home. President Obama wrote a letter to each of the people who received clemency from him. And in part of that letter, he said, I'm counting on you. I'm counting on you for this to be a success. And he was, in many ways, for his own legacy. Politically, it was important that he count on the person who was being released from prison. Oftentimes someone, in our cases, who had been doing a life term. How profound is that? That the most powerful person in the world was counting on one of the least powerful people in the world for success. We're really lucky to have the people here to hear from today who are going to describe aspects of this world of criminal law where we find this great tragedy and sometimes these remarkable mercies. I'm going to allow each of them about 10 minutes to describe their work, and then I'm going to follow up with some questions about some of the challenges that we face, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. And there's 3x5 index cards that we'll ask people to put the question on that will be made available. But we're going to start by hearing from Leonard.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here this morning. To represent our brothers and sisters that are inside. To represent those who have come home. To represent the families of those that are incarcerated as well. My work with the Insight Prison Project, as Chrisanne talked about, I started off as a participant. Became a co-facilitator while I was inside. I was fortunate to be able to come home in 2010 after winning 3 different writs of habeas corpus, 2 against the California Board of Parole hearings, and a final one against Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. In that journey of coming home, some of the struggles were just starting. I was fortunate that I had loved ones to support me. Shortly after coming home, I was able to get married. But because of the rules and regulations of the parole system, they wouldn't allow me to move into my wife's condominium. We ended up having to short sell a condominium and start renting so that we could be a couple. How do we expect people to succeed if that's the kind of things that we do to people that come home? I was also very fortunate in that my wife worked at a Jesuit university. So 2 days after we were married, I was able to start working towards my degree and was able to earn a double major in finance and entrepreneurship. But even after graduating, because of my background, people weren't wanting to interview me for a new job. I finally went back to working, doing manual labor. For us to want people to succeed when we come home, we need different opportunities. We need opportunities like what the Insight Prison Project offers in 7 of the prisons in California. We go in and we offer our victim offender education group. It's designed to be a 52-week curriculum that helps people understand the impact of the crime that they've committed, to face that. We use a lot of different acronyms in the work that we do. One of my favorite is AIR, because all of us, in order to live, we need to breathe. And to breathe, we need air. Accountability for our past, integrity in the moment, and responsibility for the choices we make moving forward. If we're living in air, we're not harming more people. We go through a lot of different tools to help people understand what brought us to the point that we were willing to commit the harm that we did, and to understand how that harm impacted our community. Not just the direct victim, but their family, their community, our family, our friends, our community. Looking and understanding things like victim reminders. There's the easy ones to think about, like birthdays, holidays, the day of the event. In my case, I killed my girlfriend on a high school campus. When her friends sent graduation announcements, wedding announcements, birth announcements to her mother and stepfather. Those are each reminders for them of something they would never have. Each time I would go before the parole board, they would get a notice that I was having a hearing. It's another reminder of bringing that pain back up for them. But then there's other ones that we may not think about. Favorite perfume, a favorite restaurant, a certain song that can all bring those pains back up. It's in that understanding of that pain that we've caused that helps people to realize how much we need to change. At the very end of our programs, we bring in surrogate survivors who come in and share the impact they've experienced. And then each of our participants have to share their impact as well. Those are very emotionally draining days, but also very powerful. I have seen survivors come in that at the beginning of the day, they're like, I don't want anyone trying to sit next to me. I don't want anyone trying to talk to me. I'm just here to tell my story. And by seeing people living in integrity, taking accountability for their past, understanding the impact, by the end of the day, they were actually hugging some of the people inside because they had been transformed as well. For us to be able to transform our system, we need more programs like this inside. We need support for the victims and survivors on the outside. We need support for the families of the people that are incarcerated, especially their children. Part of that transition of coming home is, what do you come home to? In California, when a person goes home, I was incarcerated for 23 and a half years. I was given $200 gate money to start my life. Again, I was very blessed that I had family and a community that supported me. But if I didn't have that, what would I have been facing? Having opportunities for job skills, being able to actually get an interview and truly have a chance at possibly getting that job. Those are things that we need. Fortunately, at San Quentin, where I was at that time, there were about 6,000 volunteers going into the California prison system, 35 different prisons. About 3,600 of those volunteers were just going into San Quentin. Most of the other prisons were out in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have hardly anybody showing up. There's an organization that had just started as I was going home called The Last Mile. They came in to offer entrepreneurial programming. And then they completely blew me away because I didn't think they would ever be able to get this off the ground. But they were able to get the Department of Corrections to allow them to come in and start teaching people how to do computer coding. The Department of Corrections was completely afraid of computers. Hardly anybody in the prison had any kind of access. They began training these people in how to code. And guys were coming home and getting $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 a year jobs. That's giving someone an opportunity to get on their feet and make a living. Most of the other jobs within the prison system and most of the other trainings that the system offers are offering people entry-level positions. In California, you can't live on $15 an hour. You're not going to make it. So it's creating those opportunities, creating opportunities for housing. Within our faith communities, it's welcoming people understanding that you do have people that were incarcerated in your parishes. Many of them may not say anything because they don't want to deal with the stigma and shame. Partly for me, one of the things that led me to moving towards restorative justice when I didn't even know what restorative justice was that my faith community began shunning my mom because of what I did. To where at the sign of peace, people wouldn't even acknowledge her. She quit practicing her faith. Fortunately, many years later, we were able to get her to come back. As a people of faith, we need to do better. People that are coming home, they've had that opportunity to develop their faith inside, to take various skills. But when they come home and they're not given that opportunity, they end up walking away. I had one friend of mine that he lived in a small town. There was no choir at the church. Him and his wife started singing. They weren't asking anyone to join them. They weren't asking for any additional support. Unfortunately, he was a sex offender. Someone in the parish got on Megan's list, found his name, and the diocese sent him a letter basically telling him not to come to church anymore. We've got to do better. So it's creating opportunities to transform lives, making sure there's opportunities for housing, making sure there's opportunities for employment. Those are the things we've got to do in order to transform this system. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Leonard. As we hear this panel speak, one thing that really strikes me is that, as the criminal justice system focuses on a very narrow point in time, the time of the crime, what we're adding to the conversation as we move towards restorative justice is story complexity. That a lot of my scholarship is about the federal sentencing guidelines, this incredibly complicated set of rules that create sentences, that just produces sentences as if they're scientifically derived. They're not, but it is complicated. And at the other end of the process, or as part of the process, hopefully, as we evolve it, this story complexity that takes into account and describes the rest of a person's life, what came before, what came after, what can come next when someone walks out of the prison, and what we create that allows that to happen. And with that, it's probably appropriate to introduce our next speaker, Sister Gina.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Leonard. At Precious Blood, we have a T-shirt, actually, that says, "Don't judge my story by the chapter you walked in on." And I think, Leonard, your witness, thank you for your witness, speaks to the humanity in all of us. It reminds me of that. So I work at Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. We are a restorative justice hub on the south side of Chicago. We began in 2002 when the Precious Blood missionary priests and sisters from Kansas City and Ohio wanted to create a space in Chicago to respond to the violence in Chicago and be a reconciling presence in the South Side. Thus, our center was born, the Precious Blood Center. We originally were ministering to young teenage boys who were involved in the criminal legal system. Father Kelly, our executive director, and Father Denny have been doing detention ministry for 30 or 40 years, and they were going into the detention center visiting the juveniles and wanted to have a space for them when they came out, a safe space where we could build relationships and support them. And they took them camping and to White Sox games and fed them. And we have a space such as that, and we've expanded that beyond just those boys. It's now serving families, the families and the larger community. We have an urban farm with 70 raised beds, and we have some of our youth working in that farm and also feeding our community. And that's a safe space, a peaceful place. We have a growing returning citizens program where we are providing one of the biggest needs, and Leonard touched on this, is housing. So especially if you've been incarcerated for a long time, finding housing is very difficult, and there are laws too restricting, you know, some folks can't go even back with their families if their families are receiving public assistance, like housing support. So we have some housing, not enough, but some housing for men and women returning from prison. My ministry is primarily, and this year has really grown in this area, and it is with doing circle keeper trainings inside the prisons. And this, I am so passionate about this because it is giving these men a skill that they can use inside the prison. And when we talk about human dignity, prison is a place where human dignity is not recognized. And in doing this 4-day circle keeper training, it's giving the skills to these men to hold their own circles with each other. And sitting in circle is healing. It's a way of being in building relationships and being with one another that we don't usually do. We did a training in Kewanee, which is a reentry center, so probably a minimum security. And 3 weeks later, the guys told me, or they told me at the training, they wanted to have circles for guys who were being transferred into the prison to help them integrate into this prison that's very different than maximum security prisons because it had so much more freedom. But in that freedom, there's a lot of anxiety because a person may not feel safe because they don't have the structure that they had in the max. So anyway, 3 weeks later, they had a circle, and they said it was a great success. And two of the guys kept the circle, and then they've been keeping circles since then. So that's one area that I'm very grateful to be involved in and to be moving more deeply into. And I just want to say one thing that a gentleman said to me just last week after this training we did at a maximum security in Joliet. At the end, he was thanking me, and he said, "Janet, it's the way you treat us." And the guys are talking about it. It's how you come in here and treat us. And he said, "You treat us like we're human." So I think, you know, I wanted to cry when I heard him say that, right? So our prison system is broken, as we all know, and it's broken all around, and it's impacting everyone. And it's impacting all those who are incarcerated, and it's harming them deeply, and it's harming everyone who works there. Because when you are treating others inhumanely, it is impacting your humanity. And so one of the things that I want to do, and I am going to do, is go back to that warden and ask about circles for the staff. We have to start bringing healing opportunities and creating these safe spaces for everyone. I think I'll just stop there, and I'm sure Libby.
Thank you. And next, we're going to hear from County Attorney John Choi.
Thank you, and greetings to all of you. It's just been really amazing for me to be up here on this panel and just to listen, because it just brought back so many thoughts and deep feelings that I have. You know, to the extent that, so I am the chief prosecutor in Ramsey County, just right across the river, and I've been doing this job for quite some time now. I was first elected in 2010, so 2011 is when I took office. And then prior to that, I was also the St. Paul City Attorney, so I was the chief prosecutor in St. Paul, handling some of the lower level offenses. And, you know, Leonard, thanks so much for kind of throwing out there on this table that, you know, the way that, to the extent that these systems or government is a reflection of all of you, because at the end of the day, all of you own your government. It's a democracy and it belongs to you. There's a huge disconnect with the values that we believe or espouse, or that we could come together on a weekly basis in our places of worship, whether that's mosque, synagogue, or church. The values that we learn about redemption, reconciliation, mercy, many of those things do not exist in the systems that we have. In fact, the way that I describe the criminal justice system to people is that it often feels like an assembly line. And it's because there are so many incidents and harm that happen in our society. When something bad happens, usually what happens is somebody calls 911, the police will arrive, and they are operating under the construct of laws that we have created in the United States Constitution that protects people who might be accused of crimes, and so they operate under that construct and gather information. And as Mark talked about, it's a very singular type of inquiry. Someone usually has been harmed, and obviously there's somebody who's accused of that crime, and they will gather that information about what happened. Very rarely does information at that stage, do we gather any information about the broader circumstance of what led to that situation. It's just purely, usually just the facts about the incident. And then, now keep in mind that many of these situations and incidents happen on a daily basis. So we put it into that assembly line, and there's a defense attorney, a prosecutor, a judge, a jury sometimes, very rarely, by the way. It's usually a process of let's make a deal, plea bargaining, that's also premised on the laws that we have and what it says that a certain conviction would mean in terms of a sentence, a punishment. And so we do this process. And at the end of the day, when you get onto that assembly line, and sometimes we, I guess as human beings that operate these systems, we come up with some diversion ideas to say that, well, maybe we could divert this particular situation and give somebody a second chance. But for the most part, everybody is on this assembly line, and it's leading to a punitive outcome. Even if you're not going to go to prison, it's leading towards putting a label on your forehead to say that you are a convicted felon. And of course, there's something called collateral consequences, which means that if you have that label, you will suffer that consequence in your ability to obtain housing, education, employment, and those are real consequences. And then for those who commit the most serious offenses, the whole assembly line is moving towards processing people to put them into a box with bars. And as been said here, what happens in prison, people don't get better. Oftentimes, we're actually going to harm them more. And it is an exercise of the values of punishment. It's an exercise of values that surround an eye for an eye. That if you do something that we must as a society, and by the way, that is you, must respond accordingly in some fashion. That system does not humanize people at all. What that system does is it leads to a system of mass incarceration that we have in this country. If incarcerating people would make us safer, we truly would be the most safest country on this planet, and we are not. In Ramsey County, I've been there for a long time, but since 2012, we've reduced the numbers of people that we have sent to prison by almost 70%. And I would submit to you that in St. Paul, Minnesota, an urban jurisdiction, it is not any more safe or less safe than any other communities across this country. I also think that in many ways that if we want to truly transform our legal system into a system that is a justice system, we have to see the humanity of all people that come to it. And historically what has happened, especially in my field, is that we have, I think, prioritized the experience of the person that's been harmed. But we fail to recognize that many times those who are doing the harm hurt people. And we have not fully realized the connections to victimization and not really realize that the system that we inherited, none of us came to this job we didn't make up this system. It's embedded in our American history. But we have to come to understand that there are other ways to transform the system, that it doesn't have to be one based upon punishment, but it can be one based on rehabilitation and restoration. And we don't demand enough of our correctional systems to actually produce those outcomes. And how could you produce those outcomes when everything is, again, on this assembly line, and what we're building are people who are, we're breaking them even more. We are making it more difficult to freely live in society after they have done or finished their sentence. And how could we be more safe when we are sending people to an institution that actually harms them more? And most people, by the way, who go to prison don't stay there forever. And they come back out and they re-enter, and we're putting them in places where they can't succeed and they're going to harm again. So I think a path forward for all of us is to think about not just like a circle program or restorative justice program to be, I think we have to stop thinking about creating off-ramps to the underlying system, but ask ourselves, how do we make the underlying system, this freeway that we have, a restorative one, that we utilize restorative practices where we recognize that what we are doing is really focused around the punishment and thinking about ways in which we could do that. So one of the things that we're doing in Ramsey County is we've developed out a restorative way to develop a process by which we brought in impacted communities, people who have been harmed, and people in communities and people who have been on the side of doing the harm. And we created a leadership team to kind of reimagine our youth justice system. And what came from that is we have something called a collaborative review team, where if the prosecutor makes a decision that a crime, at least there's enough evidence there to say that a crime has been committed, we ask our community and the public defender about how best we should proceed. And one of the areas in which we put many of the situations is in a restorative context, where we will bring together it's been hard to get the person harmed because sometimes people don't want to participate, but oftentimes we'll be able to create a restorative type of response. And again, I think the most important part of that outcome is for the person who did the harm to recognize the harm that they have caused. And I really believe we saw in that video, when people can recognize that, I think they're more likely not to engage in that type of harm again. So we've been doing that since July of 2021, and we've had some really good promising results. We're also addressing some of the racial disparity. But I give you that example because I really believe that the path forward it has to be grounded in community, especially those communities that are most impacted, and letting them help us find the solutions. We have to see the humanity in the people that are involved, and not just the victim, but also embrace the fact that we need to see all people as human, and recognize and acknowledge that the systems that we have inherited or that we operate in, the system that all of you own, is a punitive one, and that it has not brought the safety results that we really want and need. And so the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different outcomes. And so it's time for a change, but that change cannot happen unless the people like you who own these systems talk to other people and to participate in the context of conversations and to move society. Because again, where we are as a nation, and in this community here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, our natural reflective reaction to bad things that happen in our community is one that is grounded in, again, punishment and an eye for an eye. And I believe that we can have a better version of justice, and it just means to include all perspectives. So thank you.
And thank you, John. And I want to say, too, just as I've been very lucky to have some great mentors, including Tom Johnson, who I know would have been in the middle of this, I really appreciate that you are the mentor to so many of my favorite students, the people who are going out and they work for you, and you probably don't realize how much of a mentor you are to people who are down the road going to be, and currently are making really important decisions. And with that, we turn it to Aswad.
Good morning. Once again, my name is Aswad Thomas, the Vice President of the Alliance for Safety and Justice. We are a multi-state public safety organization that really works to end mass incarceration by changing policies and laws that invest more in what we call shared safety solutions. Our organization was founded 10 years ago with a unique perspective. Some of what we've heard today, which was to have a conversation, about justice reforms, not just as it relates to reducing incarceration, but having conversations about real safety in communities. The foundational problem with our crime and policy structure in this country is that it hasn't been designed or built to protect people from harm before they were victims or even after they are victims as well. And the majority of survivors do not access victim services. The majority of survivors do not access victims' rights at all. And so when you think about the justice system, you think about this system called mass incarceration, it was founded by politicians, law enforcement, and also organizations representing the voices of crime victims. But one problem with that system is that it left out the voices and the experiences of the people who are most harmed by violence. Those individuals in those communities are least supported by the justice system and least supported by victim services as well. So look back at, the year 2009, where by that time over 32,000 laws were passed in this country in the name of crime victims. Also in 2009, that was the highest peak of incarceration in the United States, and that's also the same year when I became a victim of gun violence. And when I became a victim, I remember being released from the hospital back into the same community where I was shot. And I remember my doctors telling me about the physical challenges that I would have, but nobody never mentioned the psychological effects of being a victim, of going through the PTSD, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the anxiety, the depression, the stress. So I was left to deal with those experiences as a victim on my own. Had many interactions with the law enforcement who came to visit me, and every time they came to visit me, it was always about the case. They never asked me how I was doing. They never told me about the victim compensation program, which is designed to help victims. They never told me about any victim services in my community, and they also never told me that there was a victim advocate in their department that's supposed to work with victims like myself. So I remember each time that they came to visit me, I started to get very angry because I knew that they weren't focused on my healing and my well-being. And also I was going through these physical challenges of recovery and still going through those psychological challenges as well. So as I'm recovering, from these gunshot wounds, in a one-bedroom apartment on my mother's couch, I often thought, was I the only person that went through that experience? But I wasn't. So I called my father. My father was shot in his chest in the 1980s. And I say, Dad, when you got shot, did you get any help? He said no. And then I hung up with him and I called my second oldest brother, who was also shot in the 1990s. I said, hey, bro, when you got shot, did you get any help? And he said no. Then I called my cousin, who was also shot in the early 2000s, and as a result of that shooting, he's paralyzed from the waist down. And I asked him that same question, did you get any help? And he said no. So in my immediate family, 5 out of the 10 males are victims of gun violence, and all of us had many interactions with the justice system, but none that led to any services or healing after those experiences. But then I started to think about all of the friends that I've lost to violence. I started to talk to young women who I went to school with who are victims of domestic violence or victims of sexual assault in my community, and I asked them that same question. When you became a victim, did you get any help? And the majority of the answers were no. But the thing that really changed my life to lead me on this work that I do today is during my last doctor's appointment, as I'm getting surgery to remove the bullets out of my back. My doctor, as he's operating on me, he started to share the story of this teenager who he said I reminded him of. And this young man, my doctor said he was 14 years old. That young man was a victim of gun violence. My doctor saved his life, but he wasn't able to save his left eye as a result of that shooting. And I remember the more details he described about that young man, my heart just started to beat faster and faster on the operating table because I was realizing he was describing the young man that shot me. And right there, I knew something had to change. Because just like myself, that young man was shot and released back into that same community with no services, no mental health support, and no healing to recover from that shooting. And I strongly believe his unaddressed trauma played a huge role with me getting shot years later. And so I wanted to do something about that. I went back to school to get my master's in social work from the University of Connecticut because I really wanted to study, the impact of trauma that it have on individuals, families, and communities. But I also wanted to change this broken criminal justice system that we have in this country. So I started to, join my organization. I started to travel the country, talking to crime victims all across the country. And it's that common theme for most people who are victims do not access victim services. 96% do not access any support from the victim compensation program. And out of the 3 million crime victims in this country every year, only 9% of victims actually receive victim services from a victim service agency. And so through my work of not only building community and bringing survivors together and providing that peer-to-peer support, for many survivors, it's helping them get access to the victim and services that they need to help them heal and recover from violence. But it's also for many of us as survivors, community organizing and advocacy is part of the healing journey as well. So we train survivors to be organizers, we train them to be advocates, we train them to understand the legislative process in their state to help make significant changes in the criminal justice system. So while we do have a broken system, there is reason for hope across this country. There's a new victims' rights movement that's being led by Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, which is our national network, over 180,000 crime victims that are going state by state, changing policies and laws like the victim compensation program. In order to be eligible for victims compensation, you often have to file a police report or apply for the program within 1 year or 2 years. Most victims never heard about the compensation program, so they're often denied. So we've changed a lot of laws to remove those barriers to help people get access to support. We also changed a lot of laws to help, really incentivize rehabilitation in prisons, because most people are coming home one day. And when they come home, they're coming back to our community. So we want them to come home better than they were before and be able to access housing and jobs and education, things that help promote stability as well. So for most crime victims, safety for us isn't about locking people up and throwing away the key. For most crime victims, safety is about shorter prison sentences rather than long-term prison sentences. For most crime victims, safety is about investing in the infrastructure of victim services in communities to help people heal. Also safety is about when people are coming out of the justice system, that they're able to remove those collateral consequences, which is over 48,000 collateral consequences across the country. We need to, remove those barriers so people can get back to work, so people can get safe housing and education, things that helps promote our economy, things that help promote stability as well. So our organization has been able to pass over 91 bills across the country. We've helped thousands of people get out of the justice system. We've helped about 10 million people have opportunities to clear their records. And we also help to expand and launch 52 trauma recovery centers in communities to help build the infrastructure of victim services and healing and well-being to help stop the cycle of violence.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to ask a couple questions, then we're going to turn to questions from the audience. If you have a question, put it on a card and we'll have it picked up and brought up. But Leonard, I do want to go back to you and ask you, what is the biggest challenge that we face in trying to move towards restorative justice?
For me, I think the biggest challenge is changing the narrative in our system. As John pointed out earlier, many of our DAs across the country are very much focused on a punitive system. And punishment isn't going to solve anything. You remove somebody temporarily, but 95% of the people that are incarcerated are going to be coming home. They're going to be living next door to you. if you want to change that narrative, it's part of it is making sure that there are opportunities. But another part of it is one of the things that has blown me away in my own walk. Many of the programs that we're teaching inside out in California, some of these programs we should be teaching in our grammar schools, because social skills, conflict resolution, those things are just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. Because if you can't get along with your neighbor, unfortunately, our country has a place to put you. So how do we change that? Is start offering programs for our young ones so they don't end up in prison.
Yeah, and Sister Janet, I'd ask you the same question. As you do your work, what do you sense is the biggest hurdle that we face?
Well, I mean, I agree with Leonard on we are entrenched as a punitive society. It is how much can we punish. So really changing that mindset, how do we move from that, what law was broken and how big a punishment can we give, to what harm occurred, and looking, as John was saying, at some of the other circumstances, why that harm happened, and what do we need to do to bring healing or to make that right. So that would be one major thing. And as a church or as Christians and as Catholics, when are we going to truly live as Christians? And Christians means we follow Christ. The gospel Jesus, nonviolent Jesus, forgiving Jesus. So all of us as Catholics, as Christians, we need to look at ourselves and look at how are we judging, how are we not living as Christ, and call our families and our friends, co-Christians, to that. And that's a big issue, because there are a lot of Christians who are pro-death penalty, pro-lock them up and throw away the key.
Thank you. And turning to County Attorney Choi, part of our work, of course, is working with victims of crime as well. But at the same time, victims of crime often are the strongest force for retributive sentences. How do we balance that?
Well, I think the reason why oftentimes, the hardest thing that I have to do as a county attorney is meeting with victims, especially the victims that have lost a loved one because of somebody had killed their loved one, right? And what I find is that oftentimes, very truly, as Mark said, that victims will want, at that moment in time, at that moment, okay, they want usually the most severe punishment. Once in a while, you might get a victim. In fact, we just had one recently that did not want somebody to go to prison. But for the most part, they want that type of justice. And it's because it's a reflection of us that we, just as the sister was talking about, that's how we've been raised to believe that in order to get justice, someone else must suffer because I am suffering. And oftentimes I have met with families, surviving families, after a sentencing. And at a sentencing in any courtroom in the United States, the people that are impacted will have an opportunity to state what's on their mind, say something to the judge, say something to the person that just got convicted. And then, after they walk out of that courtroom, I know that for that moment, that kind of maybe what they were told justice was, I guess they might have gotten it. But then afterwards, I don't think there is any healing that happens at all. In fact, I know that there are people in prison who did the harm, who have maybe written letters of apology, but those letters are still in prison and they have never been delivered. We don't surround our victims with that continuous type of support to walk that long journey, because you just can't fix it at a sentencing hearing or the outcome of that. And then what oftentimes happens is because that process of healing hasn't occurred, maybe they'll get a letter 20 years later and they're being told that this person is up for potential release. And then, of course, it's as if nothing happened or changed. The victims oftentimes will go back to that exact same day. And again, they'll probably be hurt and harmed, and all of those feelings will come out again. And I tell you that story because I think there has to be a better way that we can help victims heal from all of this. I think there's a better way, because victims just represent our society, and there has to be a better way that we can put forward really what values are in terms of how we think about responding to harm.
Thank you. Aswad? On the same issue.
Yeah, I think it's three things. One, we need to take victim services out of the justice system. For most victims, in order to get access to any healing, you have to often cooperate with law enforcement. You have to participate in the justice system. So it's really, one is really taking victim services out of the justice system. The second, I think, when you think about victims' rights have always been synonymous with punishment. What does it look like to kind of reframe victims' rights to be synonymous more with healing? So what if every crime victims have a card that said right to trauma recovery? That includes rights to mental health services. That includes rights to housing relocation support. That includes rights to being able to take the necessary time out of work to grieve and heal. That includes rights to help you access services in your local community. So it's really shifting, how we think about victims' rights. To have more of a right to trauma recovery is important. And then third, I travel this country every week. We hear the stories across the country. We hear in our local news about violence and victimization that's happening in communities every single day. We all know gun violence is a key topic of conversation for this country. But what we're not talking about is what we are talking about today is the importance of helping people heal and recover from violence. Across the country, most crime victims do not have any place to go to get victim services. A lot of crime victims are having to stay in unsafe homes where they may have lost their loved one or became a victim because they don't have the resources, or there are policies in place that prevent them from moving away from those places. A lot of shelters across the country, don't have the resources that's needed to help meet the need. And at the federal level, we're looking at potential cuts in the Victims of Crime Act funding by about 40%, which a lot of organizations across the country will have to lay off staff or shut their doors. So we really need to invest more, in this infrastructure of victim services, and we can do that by taking money out of the justice system and reinvesting those resources back into communities to help communities heal.
All right, thank you. There's a question I can answer quickly here, which is restorative justice teaching mandatory in law school? And the answer is no, it's not mandatory in the sense that there is a required class in any school that I'm aware of. It may be that someplace does do that, but it's certainly not a general practice. I can tell you that as someone who teaches first-year criminal law, restorative justice is part of what I teach, sure. And I've written a casebook for first-year criminal law that does discuss restorative justice. So insofar as that class is mandatory, yes. So I'd like to turn back to Sister Janet again. And the question is, how do we best build a network of faith communities to transform the legal system to better reflect the values of redemption, reconciliation, and restoration?
Can you give me that again?
Sure. how do we best build a network of faith communities to transform the legal system towards these goals? And I guess the question, as much as anything, is how do we take the work that you're doing and build that into a network?
Well, in Chicago, Precious Blood is one of a handful, 7 or 8 restorative justice hubs. So we do have a somewhat of a network. It's not all faith communities, but it's nonprofit organizations, and each one has a different focus. But we share a database network together and trainings around restorative justice. So that's one thing that we have in Chicago. I think the faith community, again, going back to, so in our churches and our priests, in the preaching the gospel, and those who are going to Mass anyway, need to be hearing in our homilies and in our churches the gospel, and the gospel of everyone has inherent human dignity. We've heard it several times here tonight and all weekend. And recognizing that, and also that John said, shifting that mindset into like a restorative mindset. We are not safer, even though we lock up more people than like any other country. We're not safer. So our system isn't working. Let's reclaim that system and rewrite the script for it. I have one other comment I wanted to make on what Aswad talked about, removing victim services from the justice system. Right now, it's sitting in the prosecutor's office, and I had a public defender contacted me. I'm working with this public defender. He said, my client wants to apologize. He's been locked up 18 years. He was a juvenile. He wants to apologize. But he said to me, I don't want to go to victim services. I got to go through the prosecutor. They're going to tell them, don't talk to them. No, don't do that. That's not good. So we got to change that. How do we connect with the family? So we're really struggling how to reach out to that family. The public defender can do it legally, but we don't want to re-traumatize the family. So we're trying to brainstorm, how do we do this? And I thought, let's find out the faith community. Let's try to contact the pastor or minister at a church where they belong. Is there any way this person could connect with the family? So I feel passionate about that, and pray that we can change that. So, sorry.
Oh, no, thank you so much. And this one is for County Attorney Choi. Thank you for your leadership in employing restorative justice practices. How many prosecutors and county attorneys in the U.S. are similarly moving this direction? Are the results consistently positive?
Well, it's hard because, and I'll answer that question, and I just want to follow up on what Sister Janet said. I mean, I think this network of faith communities is really critical because I really do believe the values across this country on a weekly basis are to really lift up this aspect of mercy, forgiveness, redemption, all of those things that all of you have been talking about from a restorative perspective. But the greatest threat right now is that all of this is becoming so politicized. And in fact, it's a part of a playbook to say that to go the other way, and somehow that fear, driving and stoking it, is going to get you more votes, or it's going to lead to more political power. And that's something that I think is just really, really dangerous. And so the question about is this the restorative approach something that's gaining ground or taking shape? I think in certain pockets around this country there are, but also too I've noticed that people who are running for election wanting a more fair and just criminal justice system oftentimes are under attack And these now prosecutor elections have become very politicized. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but a part of this is it's this conversation that you're having about wanting a more restorative justice system, or a justice system that might be worthy of its name, and that it would be embraced by all people. That has now become somewhat of a political issue. And some people would say that the way to public safety is to do exactly what we've been doing in the past, which would be incarcerating people as a way to prevent crime, regardless of the rights of individuals, whether or not they've even been convicted of a crime, more policing, et cetera. All of these things are just conversations that we're having in this nation, and I think that there are pockets of this, but it's just really kind of in a fragile situation, I think. And I think we see it here in the Twin Cities. We have a newly elected county attorney in Hennepin County, and she is trying to do things differently. And she's faced with enormous pushback. And I think those are the challenges that people have when they're trying to make the criminal justice system perform better, and by doing it by embracing a different version of like our methodology to get to safety.
Thank you. So, John, I have a question that was posed to you, but I think I'm going to answer it. It relates to what you just asked. With the rise of juvenile crime related to armed carjackings and murder, what message are we sending potential offenders, victims, and their families when the system gives light sentences? Case in point, a juvenile murdered a woman in Minneapolis, and the juvenile was given a 2-year sentence, despite the community and the victim's family desiring longer sentences. Story complexity matters. This case, if it's the one I'm thinking of, again, I don't handle juvenile side of it, just adults. There was a murder. There were 2 youths that were involved. One was 17 and one was 15. The 17-year-old was certified as an adult and received a sentence of over 20 years, I believe, which he's going to serve. The younger, who was 15, while receiving services, really thrived, was doing really well, by all accounts. And so, having gotten older, was given a chance. And part of that chance that younger person, who was 15 at the time of the offense, is that a longer sentence is going to hang over his head. And if, once he's released, he reoffends, he'll serve that longer sentence. What message does that send? Well, to the leader of that group, the 17-year-old, it's a pretty stern message. And to the younger one, is that there can be hope. And I'm not going to apologize for that. There is one last question that I think is really important to address, and that is relating to race. There was a question that noted that we have incredible racial disparities in the system as a whole, and how do we address that? What is it that we can do in the context of criminal justice where the damage is so long-lasting and is such a part of the history? And Aswad, you mentioned that before. Could you return to that?
Yeah, and it's a great question. There are racial disparities in the criminal justice system. We also have to recognize there are racial disparities in victim services, and we have to have an uncomfortable conversation that race has everything to do with which victims get help and which victims don't. And for many crime victims, especially think about juveniles, right? Many youth are experiencing high rates of trauma, high rates of violence in their communities, but there isn't an investment to help provide the mental health services that's needed to really address the root causes of crime and violence in our communities. And so it's important for us to continue to come back to this conversation about safety. So everyone in here, just do me this one little thing. Close your eyes. Close your eyes and think of where you feel most safe. Some of us might be thinking at home, at church, at sporting events, or at graduations, with loved ones, with your kids, with your spouse. And if you can open your eyes for me. I'm quite sure 99% of us, if not 100% of us, said we feel safe with more prisons. So we need to invest in the things that makes us safe. It's more family, more community. It's more programs for youth. It's more of the things that help stop the cycle of violence. We are in a pivotal moment in this country as it relates to criminal justice. We cannot go back to the failed policies in this country. We have to continue to build community with each other, but most importantly, we have to build political power to help us get to this vision of safety that we all want.
And that's where we're going to end. Thank you.
Well, that was truly extraordinary. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sister Janet, John, Aswad, and Leonard. Will you raise your, will you offer them your gratitude? Terrific. We have just a couple of announcements, and then you will be off to your break until 11 o'clock. There is more, I think you can, is there more nourishment there? Okay, so we've got some food and we've got some coffee and some drinks. Help yourself. Again, until 11 o'clock, which is promptly when the workshops will be offered. There are 6 more offerings today, and you can go onto the conference app or you can visit registration. Some of you may also have those printed assignments for rooms. So take a look at the sessions that are available this morning. We'll return back here at 12:30 so that you can pick up your boxed lunch. A couple of announcements before the afternoon as well, just thinking ahead. If you're sitting here wondering if you registered, can't remember, for the George Floyd Square, please visit registration. They can help you double check your registration. And then a reminder that even if you didn't sign up to do the George Floyd tour of the center, the plaza, and which will have buses, and the buses will return to the Basilica and then also make a stop back here at the law school. If you didn't sign up for that tour, you can certainly head over to the Basilica because there will be tours available this afternoon as well, and that's about 6 blocks away. Remember that if you need assistance to get over to the Basilica, again, visit registration and we can help facilitate that for you. So again, break until 11, which is basically a half an hour, so attend to your bodily needs and then choose a breakout session. Thank you so much. And thank you again, panelists.